Hi, welcome to our 2021 NCSE Project Drawdown Panel, Business Disruption, COVID-19 and Climate, Impacts of Disaster on Resilience. My name is Ariela Zycherman, and I'm a social scientist in NOAA's Climate Program Office and Program Manager for the Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments Program, also known as RISA. On behalf of my colleague, Claudia Nierenberg, who will join us on the live session, we're really looking forward to a meaningful and insightful discussion. Today, I'll introduce you to a collaboration between NOAA and the National Institute of Standard and Technology, NIST, looking at business disruption and resilience, first in the wake of climate events, and more recently in the context of complex disasters that includes the impacts of COVID-19. Then I'll turn it over to my colleagues from across the country carrying out the research projects from this collaboration. Next slide, please. So why small and medium business disruption, resilience, and climate? So according to the Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy, small and medium businesses are central to the US economy, making up 99% of US businesses, generating 44% of US economic activities and employing 59 million people in 2018. So obviously COVID-19 has impacted that number. Small and medium businesses play an important role in communities by providing local jobs, increasing the tax base, fostering community involvement, and providing diverse, locally sourced and made products and services, in some ways becoming a window into the well-being of a community. And throughout the US, increasing climate events, both in frequency and intensity, have put these businesses at risk through closures, disruptions in supply chains, and physical impacts on health and safety. COVID-19 has just been another additional risk for these same businesses. And both NOAA and NIST are agencies within the Department of Commerce and maintain a focus on weather, climate, and resilience. And this study allows us to leverage our scientific expertise to address department-wide interests in the well-being of the economy. Next slide. So a partnership between NOAA's RISA program and NIST's Applied Economics Office came to fruition because the NOAA RISA program supports place-based interdisciplinary research teams where experts, stakeholders, and practitioners work together and commit to long-term sustained engagement. NIST's Applied Economics Office has a strong survey design capacity, analytic expertise, and a community economic orientation. Together, they're able to bridge national issues with regional perspectives by executing research that takes a national question and looks for similarities and differences across regions and disaster types, and that draws on local expertise and regional specificity to address national priorities. Next slide. So together we have a portfolio of 4 projects looking across issues of small and medium business resilience and disruption that cover a variety of natural hazards and specific climate disasters. Each of these projects is managed by either a RISA team or NIST, but includes an active collaboration relationship between the two. Projects initially grew out of a shared survey design, but they evolved to meet questions relevant to the local communities where the research was taking place. And some projects were impacted by multiple hazards, multiple disasters, and sometimes these are called cascading events. And now the research has shifted to include COVID-19 conditions. So as a group, this research has real implications for both researchers working under complex disaster conditions and for the businesses and communities that are experiencing them. So I'd like to introduce the research teams for this project, particularly those people who are presenting their projects on this recorded session. So first we have Ellie Davis from the University of South Carolina and the Carolina RISA called CISA. Michelle Meyer from Texas A&M, who's also affiliated with the Texas Sea Grant Program, and SCIP, the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program RISA. Tamara Wall from the Desert Research Institute and the California Nevada RISA called CNAP, and her colleague Kristen Vandermullen will join us on the live session, and Jennifer Helgeson from the Applied Economics Office at NIST. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie for her project orientation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eleanor Davis-Perel, and as you can see, I had some fun with the title of this project, Taking Care of Business, COVID-19, Natural Hazards, and U.S. Small Business. I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Jennifer Helgeson, who you will be hearing from shortly, and Kirsten Dow of the Carolinas RISA. This research stemmed from a collaboration between CISA, NOAA, and NIST in 2019, where we conducted in-depth, in-person surveys of 65 businesses in Charleston, South Carolina. Based on the Charleston results, I proposed to focus on hurricanes and high tide flooding in the coastal Carolinas. Planned to survey businesses and then conduct in-person interviews with business owners on their hurricane plans, learned experiences, and community networks. Then, COVID happened. Like many people around the world, everything changed rapidly. I was lucky enough to be able to work from home as many lost their jobs or faced health risks at work every day. As the stories poured in about closures and impacts, I had to ask, how were the hurricane experienced small businesses, some of whom I'd already started working with in 2019, affected? I shifted my research topic to study complex hazards and better understand 3 specific areas. Instead of plans for hurricanes and high tides, I focused on the actions small businesses take to prepare for hurricanes and whether these actions influence their preparation for COVID-19. Instead of specific adaptations from previous hazard experiences, I changed to study business owners' attitudes and perceived control over COVID-19 outcomes in comparison to hurricane outcomes and whether these factors influence business recovery and adaptation. Instead of community networks just during hurricanes, I asked, how does the level of community participation influence businesses' role in community resilience during COVID-19? I deployed a survey to business owners in the coastal counties of the Carolinas and received 270 responses. And we have also deployed a shorter national survey working with the company Alignable. This research is ongoing, but we already have a few takeaways. First, this work and this field is moving beyond studying events or subjects in a vacuum. Instead, we are attempting to address the historical, social, and spatial connections that enable businesses to adapt effectively. Second, COVID-19 created a lens to identify areas in need of support and an opportunity to create more resilient systems for our local and global communities. Third, the social sciences are also adapting as in-person methodologies are currently unsafe or impossible. I have certainly learned a lesson or two about switching from in-person to virtual surveying during this time. And finally, as climate change progresses, we need to implement the lessons learned from this pandemic in our universities, our communities, and our governments. I will now be turning this over to Michelle Meyer.
Hi, and thank you. Our project coordinates with the project that Eleanor just described, and we are examining post-Hurricane Harvey organizational disruption and recovery in Southeast Texas. Next slide, please. So this project, myself, along with Ph.D. candidate Joy Simeon, and those from Texas Secret, including Pam Plotkin, Cindy Lyle, and Walter Peacock, have all been working to understand what factors impact an organization's ability to recover. And then we also added an interest in how do businesses and nonprofit recovery processes compare, as well as what do social vulnerability factors of the organization affect their recovery. And these include looking especially at minority businesses that are either veteran, women, or racial minority owned or operated. Now, the project began looking at Beaumont and Port Arthur, Texas, which is along the Texas and Louisiana border. It was affected by Hurricane Harvey in 2017. It also, though, was affected by many more disasters during our project. So it also was affected by Hurricane Imelda, as well as an industrial disaster that happened while we were surveying. And then also COVID-19 brought our surveying to a pause. We will be picking up surveying again in the spring of 2021. So we had started off with a sample of 500 organizations, both businesses and nonprofits, from Beaumont and Port Arthur. Before COVID-19, we had contacted 368 of those businesses and had 96 completed surveys. And this included 66 small businesses, 30 nonprofits, for a 36% response rate. Next slide. Our preliminary findings really dig into the different experiences and disparities of disaster recovery, especially for minority organizations. And so again, this includes veteran, women-owned, as well as racial minority-owned or led businesses or nonprofits. These organizations reported more damage from Hurricane Harvey, and they also were less likely to report full recovery at the time that they were surveyed. Across all the organizations, before Harvey, mitigation activities included mostly just backing up important documents, maintaining offsite backups, and about half of the organizations had emergency response plans. But an important finding that we're noting is that while few organizations actually had business continuity or recovery plans, those that did found them very important to a speedy recovery. Now, we had multiple disasters that affected our case study region during the study. COVID-19 was the largest and most disruptive to the research project itself. It disrupted our operational hours that we were able to be in the field, and we switched to telephone surveys for a while to try to finish up the study. And again, our sample was just overwhelmed by COVID-19, and so we chose to pause the study for the time period. It was also noted that COVID-19, in those that we were able to talk to during the pandemic, that it did decrease their profit margins. And so what we were learning about in pre-Harvey has impacts as well in a different type of disaster. And we saw organizations also change their operational structure, and that thinking about having plans for working off-site or working at home may become more important to a COVID-19 recovery, as many of them might have used during Hurricane Harvey. Next slide. In our conclusions, the research allowed us to further the development of the organizational recovery research, which is still limited in disaster recovery literature. We did have to adapt to develop really creative strategies to increase our response rates. We were doing cold calls or cold knocking at organizations, and we found that these organizations prefer Tuesdays through Thursdays. Mondays are very busy, and Fridays are very busy. We often found that nonprofits preferred to be visited later in the afternoon, and many nonprofits preferred a more open-ended interview style rather than a survey style of research. We also trained numerous graduate and undergraduate students in ethical social science research. In fact, we had about 12 students total who participated in the project, many of them from underrepresented groups in science. And now I will hand it on over to Dr. Tamara Wall.
All right, thank you. So we decided that we would take the survey instrument, working with Jen Helgeson at NIST, and try and apply it to a different type of disaster. I'm sure as many realize, the last several years have been particularly bad wildfire seasons in California and the Sierras in Nevada. And we wanted to look at wildfire smoke and potential impacts, as well as how recent efforts at de-energization, when the electrical grid is de-energized, to help reduce the possibility of wildfire ignition had on small businesses in the Sierras. Next slide. So the original project as we envisioned it started in 2018. And we decided to focus on the Chico Paradise area of California that had been heavily impacted by wildfires in 2018. And we had looked at some areas farther south around Bishop, California, and all the way down to South Lake Tahoe. But the conclusion was it had been a while since there had been a significant wildfire event. And so we chose to focus on just Paradise and the Chico region. What we found when we started working there was that there were significant perceptions that the area was over-researched. That after the Paradise fires, the Camp Fire, it was, I use the word as it was told to us that we descended, they felt descended upon by researchers, and also that they didn't get a lot of feedback from those research groups. So we decided that we would proceed very carefully. And we started working with a fantastic group at Chico State, the North State Planning and Development Collective. And we were slowly kind of working through how we would both formulate the survey instrument and in a way that was meaningful for the region, and work very closely with our partner there to make sure that they didn't feel that they were being taken advantage of with further research. And then 2020 happened. And 2020 for this region was not just COVID-19. There again was a very, very active wildfire season, and both the original areas more towards central Sierras were highly impacted by the glass fire and other fire complexes, as was the Chico and Northern California. So in this, working with all of our partners again, we've identified some new partners as well with the Sierra Business Council. And we decided to focus on a wider range across the Sierras and take two different methodological approaches. Working with the Sierra Business Council, we hope to implement a survey that will leverage some of the work that they have been doing in the past, looking at business disruption, and then working with our partners at Chico State. We were planning on doing a series of in-depth interviews, specifically looking at agricultural impacts, which is a very important sector for this region. Next slide. And I think, thinking about this and going forward, climate change is happening now, particularly in the region where I live and work in Nevada and California, and to a certain extent, both the Intermountain West and certainly in the Southwest. What it feels like is the gaps between events, whether they are natural disasters, economic crises, drought, flooding, and now this enormous public health event with a pandemic, is that things are just happening more quickly, that we're not getting time in between these events to recover adequately. And so the real question for us is, how can we really change our societies and our communities, both to be more equitable and to more resilient to all of these events? If we can't keep wildfire out of our communities, how do we build and maintain communities that can handle wildfire moving through them, for example? And I think looking at the co-benefit across all of these events, what are the things that we can do that amplify resiliency and the ability of our communities to withstand these events is really where we need to focus. Next slide. And so trying to do this work and also other work that we have been doing, looking at public health and heat impacts in Southern California, we have really learned a lot about how challenging it is to do social science research in this environment. And really realizing that our partners in these communities are often experiencing these events in very visceral ways, in very personal ways. And so really having an awareness of what people's lived and current experiences are in your partner communities, having a great humility that you may not even really understand the impacts that they're going through, a sensitivity to their current situations, and that they may simply not be able to communicate with you very often or at all, and accepting that and not taking it personally. We've also had great understanding and awareness on the part of our funders that our projects have been often delayed, or we've had to adapt on the fly to what sometimes seems like a constantly changing landscape. And then finally, really accepting that in the end, we just may not get what we want. And that has to be good enough right now, and we move forward. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you all. My name's Jennifer Helgeson, and I'm representing a project that has close ties to all the projects you just heard about, as well as kind of a new emerging national theme related to complex events that small and medium-sized enterprises are facing during COVID-19, specifically natural disasters. So a lot of my co-authors and co-thinkers on this piece are listed here. Next slide, please. Okay, so the overview of the project, this is a longitudinal project, and at the time of this recording, we're endeavoring on kind of the phase 2, the second questionnaire, but we're focused across 4 objectives, thinking about resilience-based mitigation actions that are employed during COVID-19, assessing challenges in implementing these mitigation actions. Thirdly, identifying use of past strategies, especially those that have been used to think about either mitigating and or adapting to natural disasters and or extreme weather events in the past. And then finally, assessing planned resilience actions in the case of a complex event kind of during COVID-19. If and when there is an extreme weather or other climate related event. Next slide. All right, so the overview of our project, our sample was drawn using the Sheldis database, looking at counties with previous natural disaster experience, just defined rather broadly. And then we did a combination of direct emails to small and medium-sized enterprises in specific sectors. We also did leverage our relationship with a number of NOAA networks, such as Weather Ready Nation, the RISA network, and other federal partners, such as the Minority Business Development Agency. In total, we have 1,374 survey responses. And here's the breakdown by region. Related to just about 1,350 SMEs that actually provided this locational information. Not surprising, given that our focus was on natural disasters during COVID, and during the time that this was done in July 2020, there were a number of events, especially in the South Census region. Next, please. So you heard a lot about the constituent projects that gave us ideas and inspired us in this very specific work. We had an online survey of SMEs deployed in the summer of 2020. In the late fall, we are now working on deploying kind of the second wave survey, a combination of respondents from the first wave as well as a refreshment sample. We do have plans as the situation continues, potentially to do a third wave that is much more focused on qualitative data collection. Think about complex event follow-ups and not just necessarily those things that are natural disasters, but more persistent stressors as well. Then of course, analyzing these multi-hazard preparation and response data that we get, and really what we're trying to do here is help inform at the federal level decisions that are made by our federal partners that have a more direct link to small and medium-sized enterprises. So next slide. Really what has emerged from kind of working with all my colleagues that spoke before me and in this specific piece of more national level work is that learning, agency, and flexibility are really helpful in addressing complex events and the associated uncertainty. And that can be temporal or kind of intensity uncertainty. There's 4 major spaces that SMEs have expressed need. kind of assistance in navigating really deep uncertainty. A lot of people have used phrases like, I wish I had a crystal ball. Clear and detailed information and training, access to assistance with PPE and other equipment, not necessarily being given it, but understanding what is needed. And then finally, access to financial assistance, but also more importantly, financial information. To give an example, many people who had business interruption insurance who had focused this on natural hazards were quite shocked that this wasn't honored in the case of COVID-19. So just really helping people kind of understand what is covered, what is not, and thinking through all the eventualities. Next slide. So finally, researcher flexibility is key. I think applying lessons from past, in this case, very initial findings, can really help structure fast turnaround research. And I think Ellie kind of got into this quite well in her presentation, kind of really understanding the concerns and perceptions of your respondents, and not necessarily using just things like the number of employees or revenue as your metrics can be quite important. Thank you, and I encourage you to reach out during the live session and or via email. Thanks.
So thank you to all our colleagues. This has been really interesting to listen to, but I see a lot of overlap in the way all of the partners have been working on complex events and have been paused but have adapted to think about moving forward in a COVID-19 world. So we're really looking forward to chatting with you live on Wednesday, January 6th at 12 p.m. Come with questions. We are ready to answer them. Bye.